friends. Today we are going to be making corsets. Now I have decided to do this video because one, I needed a new corset, and two, I have recently been having a lot of requests from friends, or not necessarily requests, but it has been made known to me in the past several months that many of my friends have wanted to make corsets. However, they fear that they lack the capabilities and sewing knowledge to do so. Now, I will admit that corsets can be very, very tricky. In fact, they are very tricky, and it still are some of the hardest things that I ever have sewn. As far as I'm concerned, if you know how to use a sewing machine, then you can sew anything as long as you just take the proper steps to do so. So today I'm going to give you a crash course in corsetry that will hopefully be as beginner friendly as possible. So I have gone very much into detail and tried to give you all of the tips and tricks that I have learned as I have made corsets. First, we are starting with the block pattern. I made another video teaching you how to do this, so make sure you go check that out. And from here we are going to draw the pattern pieces for the corset. First, draw out the lines for the top and bottom. Usually the top line for me comes straight out of the armpit, and you can raise it a little when you come to the bust, or you can keep it going straight across if you want a more of like a half-busted corset. And then it just goes straight across the back.
It's gonna look like a 2-year-old did this.
For the bottom line, I like to go just past the hips and kind of taper it off to a point in the front and the back. And the word taper just means that you're kind of sloping it into a line. Alright, let's talk about corset patterns. There's this misconception that most people tend to think that in order to get that hourglass, wasp waist, like skinny look, that they need to lace their corset super tight. This is not true. I mean, like, sure, you can look skinnier the more you lace it down, but like that's gonna be more painful. The most important part to getting that really nice corset shape is the way that you cut the pattern. As you can see, some of your pieces are gonna have some dramatic curves, and we'll talk about these. I've drawn 2 torsos here so I can show you how to draw up a corset pattern. Okay, first I'm actually going to explain to you how to make a corset that will be comfortable. Now, when you're making a corset, it's important that you tailor it to your body type. We are all different people. Some of us are more squishy than others, and so there are a couple ways that you can achieve a nice hourglass shape. So if you were, say, like a more rounder person, we'll just give this lady a nice pear-shaped silhouette. If you're a nice round person like our friend here, you should be able to put your hands on your hips and then squish your waist in just a little bit. And basically what a corset does is when you lace down, it's just going to squish in your waist, kind of like your hands are resting there, and it just holds it in that position. That doesn't have to cause any pain as long as the corset is fitted to your bust and your hip measurement. A lot of corsets that you get from Amazon are pretty straight, like the seams are cut in these not so dramatic curves, and so people think that they need to lace them super tight in order to achieve that hourglass shape, but that's just going to put more pressure on the hips and more pressure on the bust, and that's just going to cause a lot of pain. And so basically what you're doing is you're making your bust measurement and your hip measurement the exact same, and you're just going to be taking in a tiny, like a few inches from the waist. And this is just going to squish all of your body fat this way, this way. It's just gonna like hold it there. And you'll get a really like dramatic and flattering shape, but it will not like cause any pain. Now let's say that you're like a scrawnier person. Scrawny is probably not a great word. Let's say that you're a more thin person and you don't have a lot of meat on your bones, and let's say that you can't really squish down. Well, what you're gonna do is you're just going to make your corset the same as your waist measurement, or as where you're comfortable, however tight you want that to be. And then what you're going to do is you're going to expand the amount of room that you have in your bust and hips. So you're going to add more space than you actually have, and then you're just going to pad that with some cotton padding, so you're kind of like stuffing it to make your bust and hips larger. Basically, when you're making your corset, you can be the best judge of how much you want to add padding, how much you want to squish down, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. So usually when I do corsets, I have about 7 panels. You can have, I think you can have as many as you want, but like typically I usually have 7. I would recommend finding a reference that you like, maybe on Pinterest, and then just kind of trying to match the pattern as best you can. One of the most important things I've learned about patterning corsets is that this front panel and this back panel have to be straight. One mistake that I made was I realized once that I made my corset a little bit too big, and so I just decided to rip out the back panel. However, this seam was cut on a curve, and so that was making my back panel. I actually have it right here, I'll show you. So I tore out the back panel to give myself more room because there was a little bit of fabric taken out of this seam. It's not flat anymore, as you can tell, and it really pushes into my back and is putting a little bit too much pressure on my hips, which is not comfortable. So make sure that this back seam, this back panel is straight, and that the front panel is also straight. So for your front panel, what you're typically gonna do, so let's say this is your center front seam, you're gonna insert the busk. Your busk is this thing that you use for closures, but it's a very, it's made of metal, it's very sturdy. So I usually like to do 1 inch or 1.5 inches on both sides, and this is just gonna give you like a straight stick pattern. You'll probably end up with something like this. I'm also going to establish kind of where I want the corset to be sitting. And then usually the back I keep pretty straight. You can also do a point in the back, but I just kind of let mine gently slope off like so. For the back, you can take out 2 inches is kind of a safe bet. So you're actually going to remove this fabric from your pattern so that you have a lacing gap. Imagine we have a few eyelets here, and then you're also going to have these thin back panels, and I like to keep these maybe 1 inch or 2 wide, big enough so that they can contain your eyelets. We're making a rainbow corset today. Let me know in the comments if you would make a rainbow corset. And then next for the front panel, I would just go down the side front seam, going down, and then I would follow this straight line. And then you're going to have another one ending right at the end. You're going to follow that one down as well, kind of sloping it. And these are going to be your second and third front panels. And then whatever's left between here and the side seam is going to be your third panel. So you should still have 1 inch or 2 going across the top. From here, I will show you how to do this when I draft my pattern. But after you have marked that on yourself, you're going to take in the waist a little bit, and that's going to give you that nice dramatic shape. So those are all the front panels of your corset. And for the back panels, I usually have 3. So we've got this one for the lacing gap, and then I would just divide, I would just divide whatever's left in half when you're marking this on yourself. So hopefully that made sense. I think it'll make more sense once we actually get into patterning. For the front half of the corset, I start with my first panel, which I usually mark a straight line 1 inch away, or about 1 inch away from the opening. And you can also take your busk and just mark how much you need and just add a little bit onto that, because the most important part about the first panel is that it fits the busk. If your front panel is not strong, it can start to warp over time, which can cause the tummy of the corset to kind of push out a little bit, and that doesn't look very good. The side seams we already have, and in between the side seam and the first panel, I just like to go down the side front, just across the bust, and make a a panel that kind of tapers down and joins the front panel. For the back, I like to mark a line about an inch away on each side of the back for the lacing gap. Then I divide the rest into 3 equal parts. Another helpful thing to do is you want to mark the waist going all the way around the corset, and this is going to come in handy when you're tracing your pattern. After tracing those lines onto yourself, take off the block pattern and cut out the lines that you just drew. Because we want our pattern to be symmetrical on both sides, you only need to cut out one side. Okay, and first I'm gonna cut away the lines that I marked for the top and the bottom of the corset. And you're probably gonna see that we have a lot of like really wiggly scribbled lines. And so when I cut it out, I just kind of like to look at it all at once as I'm going so that I'm kind of seeing where I need to correct my shapes. You can also redraw the lines if that helps. Let me show you this. This is what the back looks like. I know it's really disgusting. Look at the line of best fit. And as for this side seam, I'm just gonna rip it. And I'm actually going to remark these lines with my marker. So right now my lacing gap is 1.5 inches on this side, which means it's going to be 3 inches wide. I might even go for maybe like 1 3/4. The thing is, as you wear your corset, it's going to get seasoned, meaning that the bones and the fabric and everything is going to kind of relax, like breaking in new shoes. And you'll realize that your lacing gap is going to slowly get smaller. So that's why you don't want to make it close up all the way at first. But I just like to leave maybe no more than 4 inches. Don't be afraid of cutting up those seams on your block pattern. You can trace your pieces onto paper. You can usually use wrapping paper if you need more space. Or you can use packing paper, just something that is very wide. It doesn't really matter. As you do this, mark the waistline as you go. Alright, now I've got my pattern all traced out, all except for panel number 1. I did not have room for that, but I will... This one's not that important, so I will cut a paper pattern out of this one later. Like I said, we're going to be taking a few inches out of the waistline, so I'm going to take in 1/2 inch from my side seam. So I'm taking my ruler, and this is one side seam, this is the other side seam, and then so I just marked it. And what we're actually going to do is I'm actually going to do this on one of the pattern pieces first. Because I like to have more of a dramatic shape to my corsets, I just do a straight line from that marking to the bust and hip. If you want your corset to be more of a softer shape, you can just kind of curve it. Another thing I'm gonna do to panel number 4 is just kind of straighten out this curved seam right here. I might actually take in this part in just a tiny bit, just 1/4 inch, no more. You don't want to take a ton in on any of the other panels other than the side seam, because obviously whatever's going to be below this angle is going to kind of pucker out. So if you had more fabric puckering out this way, that's just going to make your stomach look a bit weird, because it's just going to look like your stomach is sticking out. And now we're actually going to use this piece. You can see the lovely Christmas wrapping paper I'm using. And we're gonna match this up with that back piece. Match up the waistline first, and then just kind of match up the sides. It might not always match up perfectly, but you want to do this with the pattern first instead of the fabric because you want this seam to be the same. And then I'm just going to mark where it stopped there and then mark where it stopped there. So it looks like it was a bit shorter on this side and a bit longer on this side. So I'm just going to take my ruler and taper off where those seams, or I'm going to taper off where the fabric kind of ended there. And then if you want, you can also take in like a tiny bit from the back as well. So I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch this time. So just really subtle. And lastly, it's important that the seams along 2 and 3 are also the same. So I would just also take like this pattern, and like this can be kind of stretched a little bit, but it's mostly just the fit around this part that you want to get correct. So I'm just going to match up that seam just so that your fabric will be able to align up with itself. And I'm just going to taper that off to where the measurement should be. Once the pattern has been altered, it's time for a mock-up. I'm using some cotton canvas for this, but you can use any other sturdy material you prefer. You can even purchase an extra yard of your fashion fabric for this, or the fabric that you intend to use for your actual corset, and you can just get some extra to play with. Luckily, corsets don't require that much fabric, so I think it'll be okay. So for our mock-up, we will need to install eyelets, and once eyelets are used, you can't really take them out and reuse them. So, and putting in eyelets can be a long and tedious process, and so what I've decided to do is actually go ahead and cut my 7th panel out of my fashion fabric, meaning the fabric that I am going to be using for the final product, and the lining for the final product, and I'm still thinking about inserting a canvas layer in between for my final corset. We'll see. But I've gone ahead and I've cut that out. Usually the back panel does not need to be altered too much, so I'm just going to, I'm pretty confident that I won't need to change much here, so I'm deciding to go ahead and do the final like back panels on the mock-up. And just some tips for lining up these panels. I would usually pin this little indent where the curves end instead of starting from the top or the bottom, because the most important thing is that these line up, and it's okay if like the top and the bottom are a little bit like off by just a 1/4 of an inch or so. And same goes for the side panels on the waistline too, like pin the waistline first and then go up and down. Start by sewing all of your panels except for the front and back ones, so this will be panels 2 through panels 6. Okay, now I'm going to walk you through how to install the busk. So these are the front panels, and you know, you have 2 sets of them. And here is the busk. I just stole it from one of my old corsets, but you can kind of see how it's warped over time. It's a little bit curved. But I'll link some busks in the description if you want to know where to get one. So first we're going to take one of these, just one of these panels, and we're going to sew up the front seams. And now I'm just going to go ahead and press that open. If you find that it's hard to fold your seam over, then you can press it on one side first, like so. And then fold it down. Alright, now we need to mark where we want the busk to go. So on this one that you've already sewn, we are going to put this side with all of these little knobs. So I just like to put it kind of like in the middle, leaving some space at the top and bottom. And then I'm just going to kind of slide it. I think it's going to fit more comfortably right there. And then I'm just going to mark where the dots are. And once you have those dots marked, you're gonna poke them with an awl. So if you don't have an awl, you can use something sharp. I just don't recommend that you cut holes in your fabric. What we're doing is just separating the fibers of the material and stretching them a little bit, and that will prevent the fabric from tearing. So now that those holes have been poked, we can slide on if I can. I'm having trouble doing this. Okay, well, I guess tip for you, you might just want to slide them in as you poke them because some of my holes have like already shrunk back to their normal size, but we'll be right back. All right, so that's been installed, and the next thing we're going to do is take the busk and we're actually going to put it on and then line up the fabric edges together, so this top and the bottom. And then I'm just going to mark where the top and the bottom of my busk are. Okay, sorry. Make sure that it's good sides facing. And what I'm actually going to do is just transfer this marking, so. And then you're going to mark where these little eyelets are. I don't know what you call these, like the little metal clasp things. And just kind of mark it close to the edge. And now we're ready to sew up this side, but we're going to skip over the parts that we marked. So when you get to this, just kind of like stitch up to it, and then lift the needle, jump, put the needle back down on that marking, and continue. And now you should just be able to take that busk and slide it through those places where you stitched. This will kind of stretch out over time when you wear the corset more, and then it'll sort itself out. Okay, now we're going to stitch the busks in place with a zipper foot. And if you do not have a zipper foot, that's okay. I do recommend that you buy one because it's a good investment. So I'm going to put my needle all the way to the left, and for this busk with the little the side of the busk, I have pinned the fabric just to kind of keep it in place. But yeah, zipper foots are nice. They just allow you to get really up and close with the busk so that it sits really nice and snug in there. Now for my back panels, I just have my canvas and then my fashion fabric and then the lining layered on top, and we're just going to stitch all of this together and then flip the lining inside out. Now we need a boning channel. I like to use this sturdy grosgrain ribbon. You can also use twill tape or bias tape. You can find twill tape or bias tape at pretty much any Sewing Notions section wherever you are. Now for the boning, I typically use a 1/4 inch boning. One, because it's cheaper, and two, because I like that it's a little more dainty. If you want your boning channels to be thicker, sometimes what I like to do is just sew a line up the middle of this of the boning channel, like here, and then I would put two sets of boning in there. If you are using a 1/4 inch boning like this, you may want to double bone the corset, or in other words, you want to add 2 bones into 1 channel. And what I like to do is, so I'm just cutting 2 bones for this channel. And now when we actually put the bones into the corset, I'll show you how to like make them all nice and rounded so that they won't stab you. But for the mock-up, just let it stab away, I guess. Anyway, so I'm going to put the bone facing in, and you'll notice that it has kind of a natural curve, or maybe it doesn't because this canvas kind of helped it lay flat. Anyway, sometimes because the boning is in a roll, it has a natural curve to it, and it can make your corset start to curve. So what you can do is when you put both bones in, you're going to put one facing this way and one facing this way. And so mine's kind of curving up, so I'm going to put this one in the opposite direction. And this will just kind of even things out, make it all straight. And now I'm just going to do that to the rest of the channels.
Alright, I have come outside to do this because I always make so much noise. So I'm just going to walk you quickly through how to put eyelets into something. So, as you have seen, I have marked all of where I want my holes 1 inch apart. Let me zoom in so you can see. And we are first going to punch all of those holes. And I don't have the hole punch. Well, I shall return. Alright, this is the only one I could find, so hopefully it is still sharp. So, I've got my wood. You can just use like any old wood block, I suppose. Make sure that's relatively clean. And then just like smash a hole into it. There we go. Sometimes I like to bring a pair of scissors out here I can snip away the extra bit. When I was purchasing grommet kits in the past, I've noticed that there were some not so great reviews saying that like they weren't working and they were ending up all wonky, and I didn't know why. And I realized that the reason mine weren't turning out good was because the manufacturer had given me the wrong size. For the wrong size of this tool, of a grommet setter, that's what it's called, for the grommet. So just always make sure that you have the right size. So this one is I don't know, it just says number 400, but I believe these are 1/4 inch grommets, which are what I typically like to use. And when you're going to set the grommet, you have to remember that this piece, I like to call them the hat pieces because it looks like a little hat. But this is the one that's going to end up on the outside. Wait. No. Yes. Yes, that's correct. So you always want, because this little lip is going to fold over when you smash it, and sometimes it doesn't always look so clean, so you want that side to be facing the wrong side of the fabric. So I've punched my hole, and what I'm going to do is take that little hat and then put that on the right side of the fabric. And then, so actually, I probably should. I'm showing you the weird way of how I do this. I'm just kidding. Okay, yeah. So a more easier way to do this is to put it on the little bottom piece there, and then slip your fabric over, and then you're going to take the backing, and then you're going to make sure that goes over, put on your top piece, and then you're just going to smash away. And then, if you did everything correctly, you should have a nice, clean grommet. This is probably one of the most comfortable corsets that I've ever made, which says a lot because look how much this curves in. So here's the mock-up. This is what the back looks like. I think I gave myself maybe a 2 or 3 inch lacing gap. So from here, you can alter whatever you think needs to be altered. You can probably take it in a bit more from the side seam if you feel like it. I know that sometimes if you take in too much from the side seam, you'll end up with like floppy, like hip panels, and there'll just be too much space here. So you might want to fix that as well. Same goes for up here. But as for me, I think that I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. If you still don't feel very confident with your corset mock-up, then you can make as many as you want until you feel comfortable. I know that like maybe you don't have enough fabric, but like I personally hate making corset mock-ups because they're so time consuming, and then you do all this work and you might be disappointed in the end, but I will say that it's worth it, and you learn so much from every single mock-up that you make. So I highly recommend that you get some experience making these mock-ups, and if you're feeling good about it, then we can go ahead and move on to making the corset from the fashion fabric. To get started on the real corset, I cut out my pattern from my fashion fabric, a layer of canvas, and a lining. The canvas here is optional. The most important thing is you just want to make sure that your fabric is thick enough to sustain itself over time. And one thing I've noticed with making corsets is I've usually done sturdy cotton fabrics and done just 2 layers. However, over time the fabric will start to kind of wrinkle and kind of deform itself. That's just not very good. So this time I decided to experiment by putting in some canvas in between the layers, and you just have to do 1 layer. Canvas is a really thick fabric, and so just 1 layer will probably do. And then the fashion fabric, good sides facing out. For panel 1, I layered the canvas, lining, good sides facing up, and then the fashion fabric wrong side up. Trace the busk markings like before and sew. Sew all of the panels together. If you don't feel confident stitching all of these fabric layers at once, you can do a basting stitch, which is basically a long stitch just around the perimeter of the fabric, and sew all your panels together, making sure that the basting stitch is to the right of the stitch that you are sewing. Then trim off the excess fabric. Press the seams open. So make sure you don't trim off too much because you're going to need to press the seams open. I like to use a tailor's ham, which is basically this round ham-shaped thing. Usually they're made of wool or like a sturdy cotton and stuffed with sawdust or something. A friend gave this to me. I don't know where you'd usually get them, but that's optional. You don't have to use a tailor's ham, but it really does help get around those curves. You can also make one if you feel like it. Now for my boning channels, I'm going to be making my own bias tape. And bias tape is basically a fancy word for strips of fabric that were cut on a diagonal of the fabric. The bias refers to the 45-degree angle of your fabric. When you cut fabric on the bias, it won't fray because of the way the fabric is woven and the angle that you cut it. And another perk with this is the bias is very stretchy, meaning that your bias strips of fabric can be stretched around curvy parts of your material, which is why bias tape is really good for boning channels and for binding edges of fabric. To make bias tape, I folded my fabric on the diagonal and I cut strips on that diagonal line. I cut some 1-inch strips and I cut some 1.5-inch strips. Fold those in and press, and then you can cut and insert bone. I usually double bone my corset unless the channel is a little too thin to hold 2 bones.
I like to double bone my corsets. One, because boning can be flimsy. I like to just use this sew-through plastic boning you can find on Amazon. It's very cheap and inexpensive, especially if you buy it in this really delicate 1/4 inch size. However, it has a natural curve to it because it comes in a roll. And when you put this inside your corset will bend this way because of, or it'll bend with the curve, which is why I like to add 2 bones per channel and just flip one this way and flip one the other way. And that way it will neutralize itself and go flat. To finish the ends of my boning, I just like to burn them. Now we need to bind up the top and bottom edges. Cut your top and bottom clean, and then sew the edge of your bias tape to the outside. So now it is time to do the finishing hand sewing details. However, I have not been out of the house. Well, I have been out of the house, but I've not gotten my exercise today. I probably should bike with both of my hands. Normally I would put my things in my basket here, but unfortunately, hold on. Unfortunately, they're much too big. So I've got them in my bag and my pockets. Then fold it under and stitch by hand. Now it's time for flossing. Now I'm not talking about floss for your teeth. Corset flossing is a method that Victorians used to keep the boning in place by just embroidering the ends of the boning channels with some fancy stitchery. You can use any colors you like. If you've never embroidered before, I recommend you just separate the embroidery floss so that you have maybe 3 strands. Honestly, I just like to look up flossing on Pinterest and just copy a reference here. I feel like I'm not very good at explaining this, so I won't really go over corset flossing, but I'm pretty sure you can find some reels on Pinterest showing you how to do it. This is what I ended up doing for mine. So you can do these cute little flowers, or you can do X's. I like to do flowers over these channels that have 2 bones in them. These are the 1.5 inch strips channels, and I just like to sew down the middle and put 2 bones in there. And so sometimes I do like a bigger design on those because there's fewer of them on the corset, and then for the single bones I just do like a little X or something. I also added some lace to the top of my corset. Now I'm going to teach you how to tie a corset. There's a couple things that you can use to tie a corset. You can use macrame cord, is really good. This is some cotton macrame cording. This one's kind of thick, so I'd preferably like to use a less thick one, but this is all I've got. You can also use like a nylon paracord, which is also really good. And actually, I think I might prefer the paracord to the cotton cord just because it slides around easily and it's strong. You can also use ribbon. Ribbon looks very nice and pretty, but it doesn't really last it's not very sustainable. So I would not recommend it. But I've got my cord. I don't know how to exactly like get the proper length, but what I like to do is just kind of measure it out by just kind of go back and forth between all of the grommets and just kind of like lay it out so you know how much you need. You also want to add maybe a good, I don't know, how much would you say this is? Like good 16 inches on both sides. So I don't know. You need enough to tie a bow and something like that. So
I just have this length. This looks like it'll be plenty, so I'm just going to use this. The first thing I'm going to do is chop the ends off of my cording so that they're like nice and fresh. And take some tape. And we're just going to wrap the tape around as tight as we can. And this is just going to give us a nice clean edge so that we can thread it through without too much trouble. That's the other good thing about using the paracord is you can actually just tie it off and then burn the ends because then they'll melt and seal themselves off. Okay, now my ends have been taped, and what I'm actually going to do now is find the middle of my cording. So I've got my middle. Let me zoom back out here. And I'm going to start at the top. Just kind of estimate how much of a lacing gap I will need. I think that I needed maybe... I'm going to go for like 3 or 4 inches. I'm going to use a clamp. Just clamp that. First, I'm going to take my... It doesn't matter which side you start on. I'm starting on the left. And I'm going to go up through this first hole. And mine is kind of stuck underneath the lace. This was probably not a good idea, but I assumed this was going to work, but now I'm realizing pull that all the way through. Do the same to the other side. Probably don't sew lace over your eyelet. Wasn't maybe my best choice, but what can you do? Okay, now I'm gonna take the right side and go down through the left. And then take the... Nope, that was the wrong hole. Then take the left side and go down through the right. And then take the right side and go up through the left. Now we're doing the bunny ears method, which means we're going to have 2 loops of this cording in the middle of the corset, and this is going to make it so that we can pull on those loops and tie the corset really easily in the middle instead of it being at the top or the bottom. Because if you pull from the top or the bottom, then it's only going to gather, it's only going to cinch in from the top or the bottom. So you need to do it from the middle so that you do it equally. And so you're going to, keep doing this threading pattern until you get to the 2 middle grommets. You don't know which eyelets are the middle. Just do whichever ones are closest to your waist, because that is going to be the best place to tie it. So, okay, so I'm on the 7th grommet down, and the most important thing about this is that whichever ones you're using for the loops, you need to make sure that the cording is coming up this time. And then you're just going to take, so I'm on the left one, or the left cord, and I'm taking that and just going back down into the left side. And I don't know, I'm gonna leave I might relace this corset with something a bit thinner, because I think this cording is a little too thick, but for demonstrative purposes, this is what we've got, I suppose. So yeah, just eyeball how long you need this to be. Just make sure that it's long enough that you can tie it like that. See, this is a pretty big knot, and I probably wouldn't want that sitting against my back, so I will probably be using something else for this. Actually, I'm just gonna switch it right now. And we're back, folks, and I've decided to use the same cording from my mock-up, which I don't know why I didn't just do that in the first place, but here we are. Okay, so once you have finished your loops, then you're just going to go back to your normal lacing technique, starting by coming up through one side. Oh, sorry. And then down through another until you get to the end. So I've just gone down through these. Doesn't really matter if you're going down or up. It doesn't matter if your grommets are even or odd, because you can just always fudge it. I don't know. Just always figure it out. I guess I didn't tell you what I was doing. I'm making a knot with the ends of the whatever this is, the cord. I'm gonna leave the tape on for now, and maybe actually I don't know what I'm gonna do. Usually I just like chop that. I'll just chop it off. Welcome to more impulsive decision making. You can just leave it like this, as long as your knot feels nice and secure. When you're adjusting your corset, you just want to make sure that you're not pulling through all the way when you're pulling. So just leave all of these loose. Then when you're ready, I just kind of like tuck my arms in and then just kind of pull it out a little bit. And this will just kind of help make sure that it's even. I just want it to be completely even. So that's how I like to lace my corsets. I know there's like different methods. Maybe there's different methods. I don't know. I've just always done it like this. I've never really learned anything else, but there you go. I forgot to refocus my camera, so now I have to redo this outro, unless you want to see my blurry face, but thank you so much for joining me in today's video. I wish you luck if you are making your first corset, or if you're making your 6th corset. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Subscribe if you haven't already, and look out for more of these sewing adventures. So, with that being said, love you, bye! How to floss? No. How? Oh. Just give me a moment. What? I'm so confused. I'm gonna erase these lines. I don't know why I turned on the camera so soon, but I'm clearly not ready. Dang it. I smudged. Make sure you insert that vlog about the mock-up. I'm talking to you. You who are editing the video. My outfit today is giving like high school tech hand. Oh, excuse me. But wait, Mary, I'm running out of bias tape. Well, make some more. So I was trying to get some of this boning channel sewn, and the day that I chose to do this in particular, I was kind of dehydrated, and I had like a horrible headache, and I was having some blurry vision, and eventually I just stopped like halfway through because I needed to like take care of myself. But I'm coming back to it. Here's what I've got. I've got this. I like slipped a bit here, and then there's like some skipped stitches, but point being, I think I need to know when to stop if I'm not feeling well.